Hey, what's going on, everyone? Greg here, and I have just been blown away by the recent MacBook Pros. And one thing that these computers have done to me is basically ruin any other display that I have ever used. Like, these displays look so good that it would literally be a shame to hook these MacBook Pros up to any other external monitor, with maybe the exception of the Pro Display XDR. But that's a $5,000 monitor without the optional $1,000 stand, which is why these latest slew of rumors about a new iMac Pro with the same specs and display technology as the recent MacBook Pros has me salivating, because this literally might be the computer of my dreams, and I want to break it all down because I think for a fair number of you watching this video, this computer will make sense as your next all-in-one workstation with power, performance, ports, all topped off on what might just be the best computer display ever built, and it could be a much cheaper setup than you think. Okay, so we've heard this rumored new iMac design for quite some time. Mark Gurman has reported on it, and we've had quite a few other scattered rumors talking about what to expect out of this next generation iMac. Now, for clarity, I'm not talking about the 24-inch iMac that Apple released last March. I'm talking about the bigger 27-inch iMac that Apple has yet to refresh to its own lineup of Apple silicon chips. In fact, if we look at the rest of computers in Apple's lineup, the ones that are still on Intel, we can see that Apple only has 3 more computers to update before their transition to Apple Silicon is complete. And they only have 1 year left to do that in the time frame they set. Funnily enough, they're all desktop computers too. So we have the Intel Mac Mini, the full-size desktop Mac Pro, and of course, the 27-inch Intel iMac. Now, we have a bunch of fresh rumors about this iMac that has me really excited, and a lot of this recently comes from Dylan NKT. On Twitter, he says that it looks like Apple is getting ready to refresh their iMac for the first quarter of 2022, probably sometime in spring, and most likely with an Apple March event. So let's break down this tweet, because he is saying that this iMac may be called the iMac Pro, and that makes sense to me. I think when Apple refreshes the 27-inch iMac, there will be 2 iMacs in the lineup, the 24-inch iMac, and then the 27-inch iMac will be rebranded as just iMac Pro. It would help create a clear distinction between the M1 consumer-level Macs and the Pro Macs with their M1 Pro and M1 Max chip designations. And this is what this iMac Pro is basically going to be, because it looks like it's going to feature all of the same technology that we just got on the recent M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros, with this iMac rumored to have a new mini LED ProMotion display with a 120 Hz refresh rate. The base model coming with 16 gigabytes of unified memory and 512 gigabytes of storage, with an exact spec match for the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro. And we even have a corroborating report on that mini LED 120 Hz ProMotion display from Ross Young, a display analyst who at the last minute of the MacBook Pro launch correctly reported that the MacBook Pro would have a 120 Hz ProMotion display when no one else did. And it looks like the iMac Pro is also inspired in other ways by the most recent MacBook Pros, because Dylan is saying that these will feature a plethora of ports, like an SD card slot and an HDMI port, while still retaining the USB-C Thunderbolt ports, and also incorporating the Ethernet in the power brick, just like the 24-inch iMac. Now, most of these ports obviously make sense, right? The 27-inch iMac already has an SD card slot, and with the new MacBook Pros just getting them, it really wouldn't make sense for Apple to take that away from the desktop computer. But to my knowledge, the iMac has never had an HDMI port, so that's the only sketchy part of this rumor. And I kind of don't think Apple would incorporate an HDMI port, considering the HDMI spec they would use wouldn't even be good enough to properly drive a 5K display, and that probably also wouldn't match the iMac's resolution. It's going to likely be 5K or up. And because the iMac isn't portable, it's not like the MacBook Pros where you would be plugging these things into projectors or TVs, so I just don't see HDMI being on the iMac Pro. There's also the design element of this iMac Pro, which kind of just seems like a mystery at this point. Dylan was very ambiguous onto what this design would look like. He said it would look like a 24-inch iMac, but also the Pro Display XDR. But if you look at those two designs, they're actually quite different from each other, especially because the iMac has that bigger chin, where the Pro Display XDR has an even uniform bezel. The only design trait that they share is that they're both kind of flat on the sides and the back. And obviously, we can pretty much see that's the direction that Apple is going in with all of their designs, so obviously the iMac Pro will be flat on the sides and flat on the back. However, I think we can learn or predict quite a bit just by looking at Apple's past strategy and seeing how it's positioning the new Mac lineup. On the consumer level, you have the playful form factors, which should be getting more colorful in design, especially with that rumored M2 MacBook Air, and you also have a focus on smaller and thinner products on the consumer level end, and limited port availability with the M1 iMac, which was the first Mac designed from the ground up with Apple Silicon in mind. Then you look at the recent MacBook Pros with their beautiful displays, thicker designs to incorporate better cooling, and a better port selection that Pro users need and value. So for this new iMac Pro, we shouldn't expect it to be an upscaled version of the 24-inch iMac. That design appears to be too thin to fit in ports like an SD card slot, and actually the thickness of the new MacBook Pros is thicker than this 24-inch iMac, which is really strange. So we should expect a thicker design for the iMac Pro, not only to incorporate a bigger port selection, but also to incorporate a more beefed up cooling system that can properly cool the M1 Pro and especially the M1 Max chips to ensure optimal performance. Speaking of the M1 Pro and Max chip, I think these are perfect chips to go inside the new iMac. These are some of the most powerful chips that Apple has ever incorporated into their products, and while you may think of them as laptop chips, realize that these chips are already more powerful than what is in the 27-inch iMac, and outscoring bigger desktops like the 12-core variant of the Mac Pro. I do, however, think it's possible that based on how ambitious Apple is and based on their supposed rumored work on bigger chips designed for the Mac Pro, like a 20 and 40 core CPU and up to 128 core GPUs, that we could possibly see an additional chip option on the iMac Pro at the highest end. Because what we've seen with the recent MacBook Pros is that Apple is using lower bin chips on some of the configurations, which I kind of didn't expect them to do. So if they have Mac Pro chips that are hitting the lower CPU or GPU core count, it is possible we could see that incorporated into the desktop iMac. So maybe there could be like a 14-core CPU or like a 40-core GPU that wasn't good enough to go to the Mac Pro, and Apple could have that as just an additional chip option that could go into a desktop iMac Pro where they don't need to worry about energy efficiency as much because these things are plugged into a wall and they're not running on battery life. So while it is possible we could see bigger and beefier chips in the iMac Pro, I also don't think it's a guarantee. And personally, I really do feel like the main chips that are going to go into these are basically just going to be the same chips that are already in the MacBook Pro. The only other thing I'm not too sure about is the memory configuration. So Apple just added up to 64 gigabytes of unified memory with these recent MacBook Pros. But again, another reason why they may incorporate a higher end chip into these iMac Pros is because the current iMacs can be maxed out with 128 gigabytes of memory. So if they want to match everything spec for spec against the previous Intel iMac, they may have to incorporate, again, a lower binned version of the Mac Pro chip in order to hit the 128 gigabytes of unified memory. Or honestly, they could probably just choose to go with 64 gigabytes, considering how well that already runs on these recent MacBook Pros. I don't think anyone would really mind that limitation, but it's just something to think about. Either way, these iMacs are going to be powerful, and even if they just use the same chips that are already in the MacBook Pro, there is one feature that will separate this to make this iMac my dream computer. And it's all about the display, because the MacBook Pro display is the best computer display that I have personally ever used. The mini LED display is literally getting us around OLED performance in terms of black levels and contrast ratios, but is also exceeding OLED tech in peak brightness of what you would find on most OLED monitors or TV displays. Put that together with the fast 120Hz refresh rate and incorporating that technology into a bigger 27-inch, or if rumors turn out to be true and Apple is shrinking the bezels and keeping the iMac the same size, possibly a 30-inch 5.5K Retina display, this will hands down be one of, if not the best computer display on the market. That display, plus the power of these new Apple Silicon chips, is just going to be a jaw-dropping combo. And if you're looking for the ultimate desktop workstation that will be unrivaled from a performance and display combination from any other manufacturer, because even if you look at PC monitors with this high refresh rate and mini LED display technology, you're paying at least $3,000 to $5,000 for just the display alone. Forget the fact that the iMac comes packed in with that powerful computer as well. And I just really think that iMac Pro display, if it uses the same technology, is just going to be jaw-droppingly beautiful and will probably end up being my dream computer. Because as much as I love the MacBook Pros, it is a struggle to find an external display good enough to go alongside with this product. And while I think the iMac Pro will end up being pricey, like I think the best we can expect is for a $2,000 starting price for the base model, I likely think the starting price will be around $2,500 for a base model with all that tech packed into it. But it's still going to end up being so much cheaper than any other alternative I would want on the market with a display this good looking. And honestly, it looks like I won't have to wait too much longer to find out if this will be my dream computer, because rumors are pointing to a March release date. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this rumored iMac Pro. Do you think this will end up being your next desktop computer? What features do you want to see incorporated into it? And what would make you buy one? As always, if you like this video, be sure to leave me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help out the channel in any way, make sure you check out some of the links in the description. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.